Welcome back to the swamp, my friends, and welcome if you are new. Today we're going to be sharing some creepy and allegedly true and downright creepy deep woods horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into these creepy, downright strange, deep woods horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. Green Ridge State Forest Weirdness by WorthShopping. Many years ago, my nephew and I embarked on a camping and fishing trip to Cumberland, Maryland. Known for its serene landscapes and natural beauty, we decided to stay at a state campground on the Potomac River, anticipating a tranquil and enjoyable experience away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The campground was kind of expensive, with campsites spread far apart, offering comfort and a bit of eerie seclusion. We chose the last campsite at the end of the campground, far away from the other campers, seeking a little bit of extra privacy. With its gentle flow, the Potomac River provided a soothing backdrop, and the forest surrounding us was alive with sounds of nature. We spent the day setting up camp, enjoying the simplicity of pitching the tent, arranging our gear, and gathering firewood. The weather was perfect, with a light breeze rustling the leaves and the sun casting dappled shadows through the canopy. We fished along the riverbank, chatting casually and enjoying the companionship such trips offer. As dusk settled in, we lit a campfire, its flickering flames casting a warm glow and a comforting circle of light in the encroaching darkness. The forest around us began to transition into night mode, with the sounds of birds gradually giving way to the calls of nocturnal creatures. Everything seemed normal, just the typical symphony of forest sounds. Then, around 10 or 11 at night, something unexpected happened. We heard the sound of a woman singing in the woods. Now, it was not a song with recognizable lyrics, but a hauntingly beautiful melody without words. The voice was clear, resonant, and carried through the trees, creating a mesmerizing and unsettling atmosphere. I glanced at my nephew sitting across the fire from me and saw that he was wide-eyed and tense. My dog, lying peacefully by the fire, suddenly sprang to his feet, ears perked up and staring intently into the darkness from where the sound seemed to emanate. His usual alertness to intruders or unusual activity made his reaction all the more concerning. "Did you hear that?" I asked my nephew, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, pale in the firelight, and responded, "I don't hear anything. I'm going to bed." His denial was unconvincing, given that he was only about 10 feet away from me and the singing was quite loud. He was clearly frightened, perhaps hoping it would disappear by ignoring it or something. The melody continued, weaving through the trees. While it sounded like it was coming from one direction, it had an eerie quality that made pinpointing its source very difficult. It was as if the voice was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Despite the unsettling nature of the sound, it did not feel threatening, if you will. There was no sense of malice, just a haunting beauty that was hard to describe. I suggested to my nephew that we take a flashlight and walk around to see if we could find the source of the singing, but he was adamant about staying put. The fear in his eyes was evident, and he quickly retreated into the tent, leaving me and the dog alone by the fire. For several minutes, the melody continued. I just stood there, listening intently, my dog by my side, both of us staring into the inky blackness of the woods. The fire crackled softly, a comforting but fragile barrier between us and the unknown. Then, as suddenly as it started, the singing just stopped. The forest was incredibly silent again, except for the occasional leaves rustling in the breeze. I felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. There was no way someone could have been hiding in the woods without my dog detecting them earlier. His calm, yet alert demeanor suggested that whatever it was, it did not pose an imminent threat, but it was definitely out of the ordinary. The following day, my nephew and I discussed it a little bit more. He finally admitted to hearing the singing but was too scared to acknowledge it. We tried to rationalize what we had experienced, considering the possibility of echoes, animals, or even just other campers, but nothing really seemed to fit the situation perfectly. In the following days, I searched for some similar experiences online in the Cumberland area, but I never really found anything conclusive. Our encounter has remained a mystery, a peculiar and unforgettable chapter in our camping adventures. The memory of that night lingered as a reminder of the many unexplained phenomena that occur in the depths of nature. Weird Rural Happenings by Safe Cold 5630. A few years back, I was driving down a country lane with my sister close to Christmas time in the UK. It was late at night and we were going through a thick patch of woods. My car skidded around a corner and lost grip, sending us tumbling down into a ditch and into a farmer's field. Initially, we were both okay. However, the car's bumper had come off and the wheel had flown off. We got out of the car and rang my boyfriend, who was at work and not answering. So we stood in the field for quite some time waiting for him to see his phone finally. At some point, a lovely average lady pulled over and said we should drive to the village and ask her husband to come back with a tow rope. About an hour passed and there was no sign of the woman or her husband. It was freezing cold. We kind of gave up after a while. Then a truck pulled up with two men speaking in a very thick accent who said they could pull the car out and help us out. The truck seemed well equipped, but everything in me told me not to let these men near us. Even though we were stranded and freezing with nothing but woods and fields for miles, we declined their offer and they drove off. About 10 minutes later they returned and said they couldn't leave us there and wanted to help. I was still on edge and the alarm bells rang, so I declined again. However, this time they didn't listen to me. They left their truck on and walked towards us. The next thing I really remember is a different man in a different vehicle pulling up, putting a tow rope on my car, and putting on a spare tire, making it drivable for the short distance to my boyfriend's workplace. This man was the husband of the previously mentioned woman. I had a bad pain in my shoulder, which was later diagnosed as a broken collarbone. However, I did not feel this until after. The adrenaline really had me pumping. I just remembered the man coming to help. Now, where I think this is weird is when the man pulled up, he said there was no truck. He said there wasn't two other people. It was just me and my friend in the field alone. What I don't understand is, were the men in the truck some sort of omen? Were they some sort of spirits? Angels, maybe? This man said that his wife had told him to come help, and he had left straight away, which in no way it couldn't have taken that much time. So, were we in some sort of time void? I don't even understand. And discussing it later, my sister has no memory of these two men, and only remembers waiting for this woman's husband to come. How has this happened? And why do I not remember what happened after they exited their car? My boyfriend and I are a young couple in their mid-college years. We decided that we wanted to get away from the work and our studies for the weekend, so we took a trip to the nearest hiking trail that is a part of the Appalachian Trail. We decided to leave on a Friday once I got off work and backpack up the trail to camp and stay there over the weekend. I work in a restaurant, and it's very difficult to have some time set aside to be able to leave work. I ended up leaving work around 4 p.m., but we said that no matter what, we would be going on this trip. We finally left for the trail, and we began hiking at around 5:30. My boyfriend was an Eagle Scout, so we had all the necessary supplies for a successful camping trip. And of course, necessary substances to free our minds after the long hike. The first part of the hike was absolutely exhausting. It was all uphill, and we were both carrying at least 40 pounds in our metal-framed backpacks. An hour later, we finally passed the first shelter. If not many of you know, a shelter on this trail is about a 10-foot by 15-foot log cabin that only has 3 walls, as it is open to the outside. It's specifically used as a shelter to sleep in or hide from the rain. Midway through the hike, it began to pour dramatically in the forest. Sooner or later, we were both soaked from head to toe.
The thick fog grew quickly, as it had been hot and a humid day. The trail became very slippery, and our pace slowed down tremendously. We had hoped that we were making good time to the camping site, but it turned very dark very quickly. We took a rest in the dark as it poured on us in hopes that we would be able to find our headlamps. Once we found our headlamps, we placed them on our heads, still struggling to balance ourselves on top of the rocky and muddy path. I thought by that point we would never make it to the shelter. We walked, never giving up, although I wanted to, as my socks and shoes were wet. I was tired, hungry, drenched, and cold. The temperature had also dropped more than 25 degrees as we made our way up. It was somewhere around 8:30 when we finally made it through to the second shelter and campgrounds. There was a split in the path. Either you could walk straight to continue to the top of the view, which was about 1.5 miles away, or you could turn slightly and make a right on the path and continue up to the campgrounds. Or you could also take a 90-degree turn and walk right down to the shelter. At that point, we were drenched from head to toe and needed to dry off. It was still raining pretty bad, so it would have been nearly impossible to set up our camp and tent. We had decided that we would stay put in the shelter until the rain calmed down. We didn't hear anyone at the shelter, so I was extremely excited to have the place to ourselves and take a few tokes, if you know what I mean. After our hike, I was dead set on it. Once we walked to the shelter and got to the opening, there was a man and a woman in their 60s. We instantly thought to ourselves that they were an older couple who wanted to get away for the weekend too. We told them that we wouldn't be bothering them for long, so we put our backpacks down and attempted to dry off. The couple were very welcoming. With a lantern and an absorbing towel for me to dry off with, my boyfriend and I took our shirts off since they were both carrying a lot of weight in water. The couple seemed very normal, and the man brought a cute dog with him that I enjoyed playing with. We began introducing ourselves with our names and where we were from, and what we were doing out here. They both said they were in their 60s, their names were Joe and Maya, and they were just messing around for the weekend. In between sentences, they were taking large gulps of what looked like to be alcohol in their water pack. They said they were just having fun and met online, which veered off into dropping hints that they were there having an affair. The older woman, who says that she comes from West Virginia, struck me to be very weird. It began with her looks at first, having scraggly, shoulder-length gray hair with circular glasses resting on her face. Her teeth were very dark, nearly covered in a brown film, as if she had been using hard drugs. She wore a pullover, hiking boots, and jean shorts that nearly exposed everything. Joe, on the other hand, was just an average white male, who had gray hair and was just a tad bit overweight. They spoke about their past employments and what they had done in life. Maya said that she was a writer, who I did admire. We continued to exchange information and small talk, since they seemed very friendly. I was in a very bad mood though, and very irritable until I smoked some. My boyfriend and I periodically showed each other our phones to communicate, as we didn't have any service, but we didn't want to say things out loud. We agreed that it was okay to start smoking since they were becoming drunk. They said they didn't mind, but would like to join. I thought it was absolutely insane that they wanted to smoke at that age. The man only took 2 hits, but the woman took many, and she was struggling a lot to even flick the lighter. The guys began their own conversation, and the woman and I veered off on our own as well. The woman began to ask me strange questions, and then told me some sort of story. As she inched closer and closer to me, she would ask me to tell her a story. She grew more and more demanding, saying, "Tell me a story." My boyfriend and I met online, just as they did, so I was going to tell her about the story of how we met. I began the story with, "So you met online, right?" The woman nearly cuts me off and angrily says, "What? Why would you say that?" I said to her, "You all met online, right?" She nearly cuts me off again and then aggressively says, "What? Why would you say that?" I said again, "Earlier Joe said you all met online, didn't you?" She nearly shouts and growls, "Why do you say that?" I wanted to jump away from the conversation quickly, so I asked her, "Well, you're a writer, you said, right? So why don't you tell me about one of your best stories?" The woman suddenly becomes very happy and giggly, and while swirling her hands around her head in the air, she said, "Well, I'm a writer, in my mind." I was extremely confused and creeped out at this point. I honestly just didn't know what to say. I'm the type of person to laugh it off, so that's what I tried to do. She just said she's enjoyed being a writer in her mind. I look over at my boyfriend and Joe's conversation, and it seemed to be as normal as can be. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it from what I could tell, but Maya nearly gave me the chills as she got my attention, getting closer into my face, asking me what I was saying. The problem was I wasn't saying anything. I was silent, ignoring her. She began talking to herself. She would make very in-depth hand gestures as she spoke to herself, then would ask me what I was saying to her. I just wasn't saying a word, and she would wonder what I was telling her. She would abruptly say, yes, no, maybe, or no way, yeah, it can't wait, huh? It was very weird. As she started to rock back and forth, waving her arms around, she began crossing her legs, holding her arms up in the air above her head. She started to shout, coming out, I'm coming out, I'm coming out. She was nearly talking gibberish. None of this made any sense and was creeping me out. The older man's attention was caught, and he asked her what in the world she was doing. She says, I'm calling out, it's witchcraft. I was nearly high and terrified of all my surroundings. It stormed loudly in the background and was pitch black all around us. A small lamp rested on a beam above our heads in the middle of the wooden shelter. It was very wet and very vulnerable. Everything slowly began to get worse that night. Maya kept slurring her words, and the man demanded she gets in her sleeping bag and sleep. I sat against the wall next to my boyfriend very closely as the man crawled into his sleeping bag, and Maya attempted to put her legs in the sleeping bag but couldn't figure out how it worked apparently. She moved around for a very long time and finally ended up curling up next to Joe on top of her sleeping bag. She was probably freezing as it was 35 degrees by 9:30. Only a few minutes passed and we heard Maya whisper. Maya said angrily, "What did you give me?" She growls again. "What did you give me?" The man finally woke up and demanded, "What?" Maya hits him on his back and yells, "What did you give me?" She jumped up immediately facing us. Her eyes were nearly all black as her pupils were so enlarged. She looked nearly sadistic and yelled at us, "What did he give me?" My boyfriend and I tensed up, nearly losing our minds. She screams, the same thing over and over, even louder. As her voice screeched into my eardrums, she once again turned around to the man, laying down behind him. She slowly whispered into his ear, "Did you give me acid?" It began to run through my mind that he had drugged her, or she was having a flashback of a bad trip. Joe attempted to calm her down, but she was still restless. She laid down for approximately 5 minutes, but Maya immediately sat up. She faced us, with her legs crossed. She stared at us without breaking eye contact for at least 5 minutes. She did this every so often, sitting up staring at us, then laying back down. She would do this repeatedly, so we decided to leave. We finally found our way out as she stared at us for one last time. We pitched a camp as far away as possible, but I remained sleepless that night, in fear Maya would find our tent and crawl into it.
Hi. This happened around August of this year. I'm not sure what we experienced or if there was anything paranormal about it, but here it goes. It's also a bit of a long story, so I do apologize for that. So this took place while we were hiking up to Half Dome. We had a campground about 20 minutes drive away from the trailhead, and the group was composed of me, an 18-year-old male, my uncle, a 32-year-old male, and my uncle's friend. I'll call him D. There were also 2 girls with us, but they're not really relevant to the story. My uncle and his friend are both Christian, so there were no substances consumed that could induce the feelings that I will be talking about. We get to our campsite, set up camp, and go to sleep after eating. We plan to wake up at 4 a.m. and start the hike by 4:30. I randomly wake up at 3:30 a.m., completely wide awake and ready to go. I look out of my hammock, and I remember feeling this odd feeling, as if I were woken up by something. And I remember looking out at the moonlight scene. The moon was very bright for some reason, and thinking to myself it looks like a dream. I lay back down in my hammock, but just cannot go back to sleep. I end up waking up my uncle and our friend at about 3:50 a.m. My uncle says, "Were you walking around last night?" I say no and ask him why. He says he woke up for some reason and can hear someone walking around. Not like an animal, but a person. I say, that's weird, and we try to brush it off. We get to the trailhead at around 4:30 a.m., and as everyone is unloading from the car, D says he's going to use the bathroom, which there are a couple before the trailhead. I walk behind him for some time, before falling behind and waiting for my uncle, who forgot something in the car. The short, straight road from the parking lot runs directly into a T intersection with the road to the trailhead. The bathroom is directly across on the intersection through the field. Those who have been here know exactly what I'm talking about. We get to the intersection and wait for D to come out of the bathroom. We wait for about 10 minutes before I go back and check the bathroom. He isn't there. I get back to my uncle and tell him that. He says, "Weird, maybe he went back to the car or something." We decide to wait a little bit more. By 5:10 we begin to worry. My uncle goes to check the car while I wait at the intersection to make sure we don't miss him if he went down the road away from the trailhead. My uncle returns and says he's not there either. We decide maybe he went up to the trailhead without us, for some reason, and walk up there in about 10 minutes. He isn't there either. We are kind of baffled now, because there are no other logical places he could have went. I decide to run back down to the car and the bathroom again. I meet him halfway before I get to the intersection. He is sweaty and disheveled with a weird look in his eyes. I say, "Where have you been?" He says that he went to the bathroom, and when he got back to the intersection, we weren't there. I say, "What do you mean?" "We were waiting here this entire time, for over an hour. We checked the car, the bathroom, the trailhead, and you weren't here." He says, "Well, I don't know. I went to the bathroom." He then asks me where my uncle is. I say at the trailhead. He asks me again, and I tell him again. And note that it was weird that he asked me twice. As we're crossing the bridge to the trailhead, he sees a light off on the riverbank and exclaims, "Maybe that's him." And I just look at him and keep walking. I thought his behavior was very strange, like he wasn't thinking straight, like he wasn't all there. We finally get on with the hike, and it goes by as normal, except that we seem to keep on losing things, such as my uncle's small red flashlight and one of the girl's gloves, a water bottle, etc. It's like we just simply forgot about the items and couldn't remember where we left them. On the way back it got pretty dark, and we turned on our flashlights, and as we neared the end of the hike, after the last two waterfalls, it begins to seem as if we were walking for far too long. It feels like we had been walking in circles almost. My uncle also confirms this, asking me, "Doesn't it seem like it's taking way longer to get back?" I say, "Yeah, I was just thinking that." We keep walking, but it still seems like we aren't making any real progress. I've been on that trail many times, and as I was walking, I could not spot any familiar landmarks. It was weird. There was this feeling. It was odd. You could feel it in the air, sort of like a slight menacing feeling. It's hard to describe. I remember thinking, it feels like the woods are alive. We remarked 3 more times about how long the hike is taking and begin to laugh at it because it felt so ridiculous. After a bit longer, we finally and suddenly find ourselves on the final stretch and make it back to the car. Now, all of this seemed very odd at the time, but I just brushed it off. I only realized how weird these events were after the fact. I honestly don't know what to make of all of this. My uncle kind of looks at everything different now, and honestly I look at things different too, but I wanted to share this and see if there were any opinions in the swamp.
Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true deep woods horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to slap that like button like it owes you money, subscribe if you're new, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new episode as I upload them multiple times every single week in all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. You can also submit them on Reddit at r/thedarkswamp. I would love to see your story and potentially share it with everyone here. As always, if you're on the go but don't have YouTube Premium, but still want to download and listen to your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories no matter where you are, you can do so absolutely free on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and pretty much everywhere else you find your favorite podcast online. Thank you guys so much for all the support. Don't forget to come join me over on all those social medias. You can find the links down below. If you'd like to support the swamp a little bit further, maybe check out the merch store. We've got cool hoodies, t-shirts, all kinds of fun stuff. And I'll see you soon with another creepy episode.